That's one thing we learned this year is that just in the hemp business itself, there's a lot of opportunity, but in the ancillary business, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity.
That's Jon Cohn. He's the founder and CEO of Agronomed Pharmaceutical and Agri-Kind Hemp. This is the Lancaster Farming Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Herlock. Today we continue talking about industrial hemp. We talk with Jon Cohn about growing 62 acres of hemp in Chester County. We'll talk about the permitting process to be one of the state permit holders for growing hemp. We'll talk about CBD extraction. We'll even get into some medical marijuana discussion. So there's a lot going on here today. Stick around and we'll jump right in. Jon, welcome to the Lancaster Farming Podcast. Could you introduce yourself for us?
Sure, I'm Jon Cohn, the founder and CEO of Agronomed Pharmaceutical and Agri-Kind Hemp.
Okay, so what is Agronomed Pharmaceutical?
Agronomed's a plant-based medicines company. We look to alternative care treatment, leveraging primarily the cannabinoids from cannabis, either hemp-based or marijuana-based, as the segmentation is today, as well as augment with other plant terpenes and compounds that come from a variety of other plants.
Okay, and how long have you been in this business?
Just over 2 years.
Okay.
We started our topical formulations early last year and refined those throughout last year. Originally, they were primarily THC-driven. Made some modifications so we could sell nationally to replace the THC with just hemp-derived CBD and other cannabinoids from hemp and terpenes from hemp, for that matter. But more recently, we've been awarded a medical marijuana license as well, so we've brought back the old formulations as well as manufacture the new ones.
Okay. And did you originally start out growing hemp, or were you importing that from somewhere?
We didn't. We originally importing CBD isolate and oil from both Colorado and Nevada, and using that in our formulations.
Okay, and then what made you decide to get the permit in Pennsylvania for growing?
In 2017, in 2016, the hemp program in PA only allowed for the growth and sale research, really, which resulted in the sale of fiber from the stalks and grains from the seeds. But in 2017, they added cannabinoid processing from the flower. So once they did that, we decided it was advantageous to get in and try to manage the entire supply chain and start with growing and ending up with a consumer product.
Okay,
so full vertical integration.
Okay, so you were growing in 2017?
We did grow in 2017.
Okay, and where is that?
No, I'm sorry. I take that back. We started our formulations in 2017. We didn't grow until 2018.
Okay.
But PA did grow in 2017 with only, I think I may have misspoke. It was 2017 that PA started growing, but it was growing only for fiber and grains. 2018 was the first year they came out and allowed cannabinoids, so that's when we jumped on board.
Okay.
So this past year was our first growing season.
Okay, and what was the permitting process like?
Well, we didn't know going into it. They had 50 available permits. I believe 39 were issued. It really wasn't a terribly difficult process, but since we had filled out the medical marijuana permit in the first round last year in 2017, we were used to the 15-hour days that it required to do that. So we put a lot of effort and time into the permit process for hemp. We defined 3 research programs that we're interested in taking part of, kind of laid those out in detail for the Department of Agriculture. But the application was really only a 4 or 5 page application. I think you could probably get away with a 10 or 12 page response, and it probably would have been adequate. We didn't know how competitive the program was going to be, though, so we really kind of went all in and spent an inordinate amount of time on the application.
Okay.
Not of regret, because we didn't know very much about actually growing hemp, nor do we know about all the purposes and benefits you could gain from it. So we learned an awful lot just at the application phase.
Oh, nice. And what were if you can just sort of generally tell me about the 3 different research areas?
The 3 we went after were, one was the ability, essentially, do a market study in Pennsylvania for the different industries and different products you could offer that would be in demand in the state that resulted from hemp. That was one. Another was just basic cannabinoid research on what cannabinoids are available and what concentrations, which we also added terpenes to that study and looked at extraction capabilities, how to extract, methods to extract. And the third was to become a certified seed producer and what had to be done in order to become one. That was the one of the three we didn't work on last year. We had applied for it, we were going to move forward, but in order to do it, you need foundation seed, and we weren't able to obtain any by the time frames that were required. Last year, the program kicked off a little later than it did this year, and that coupled with the fact that all seeds had to come from outside of the country made it pretty challenging to get everything done in time, get the DEA permits ordered. So we were really under the gun with respect to getting our seed orders done. Okay. This year we hope to obtain them, but we still haven't found any yet. Well, we found some, but it's hard to find vendors that are willing to sell them to you because they don't want to lose their genetics for competitive purposes.
Right.
So
this year you will be able to source seeds domestically?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Now, is that because of state regulations or because of a change in federal policy?
It's unclear. It's definitely because of state changes. Whether that's driven by the state, the changes in the 2018 Farm Bill or not is a little bit unclear. I think it's a hedge in that direction that may result from the Farm Bill, but we sat through a webinar last week where they really did speak to the dichotomy of federal and state laws, even sourcing seeds internally to the U.S. The other difference, though, this year is just about the time you could source seeds last year, Colorado, there was one group in Colorado that became a certified seed producer that offers phyto certificates and everything in terms of certification you could get from outside the country. Prior to that, there really weren't any. So possibly just the move of the industry in that direction is opening up PA a little bit to that effect.
All right, so once you had your research permits, how did you find the land or the farmer, or talk about that?
Well, it's actually the other way around. In order to apply, you had to find the land. So you designate where you're going to grow, what you're going to grow for, and they even wanted to know your seed order at the time you applied last year. Now that application, I don't believe, was due until the end of January. This year, it's a two-part process. So this year, you apply by December 17th, and that's everything except your seeds. And then I believe you have up until sometime in January or February to let them know where you're getting the seeds.
Okay.
And if you need them to work on the DEA certificate. But in either case, where you're going to grow in a lease this year is required. So that was part of the marathon, or really the sprint last year. We had decided just after the first of the year that we were going to do this. The regs had just come out, the applications were available, but we didn't have any farmland to grow on, nor did we have a farmer to partner with. So we partnered with a group in West Grove area. We had thought they were farmers. I guess many years ago they were mushroom farmers, but really they were in the compost business. So as it turned out, they were really, in terms of a partnership, they were really just landowners. So as the season progressed, we thought we didn't know very much. They realized they didn't know very much. So it ended up being incumbent upon all of us to learn very quickly. And we did. We found we did some things very well. We found out some things that we would never do again. And we really found the necessity to test everything you do. Because especially when you're dealing with genetics, hemp genetics from Finland or France, you're dealing with very different climate conditions, very different latitudes. So, for example, the seeds we obtained from Finland, they're autoflower seeds. They're supposed to germinate, and from germination to harvest takes 63 days. In our fields, they took 44 days.
Oh, no.
So it creates a little bit of a challenge when you're planning for harvest 2.5 weeks further along than you were.
Yeah, right.
And your facility isn't ready to process or dry, and so those are the types of things that you really want to make sure you stay ahead of. The use of fertilizer versus not using it, the use of pesticides versus not using it, herbicides, same things. The group we farmed with was really bent on being organic, which we're very big believers in. However, organic doesn't mean you just plant the seeds and walk away. There's certainly measures you need to take in order to achieve success while being organic, and many of those things weren't done or weren't done properly. So those are the learning experiences that you end up with.
So who was doing the actual farming? Who was, planting? Who was cultivating?
Well, it was supposed to be our JV partner in West Grove. Their responsibility was agriculture. Our responsibility was everything else. They did accomplish the original ripping, and our fields hadn't previously been farmed. I would say at least in 20 years, maybe more than that.
Oh, okay.
Or if it was for hay. So there was an awful lot of, and being a compost maker, there were big giant trucks, heavy trucks that were in the fields. So they had to be ripped in addition to disked. So they handled that aspect. They procured some seeders and modified them to be able to seed, although not to the specification that we had provided, because we specifically were growing for grain in certain fields, which is very dense seeding, and cannabinoids in other fields, which is a much less dense, about 80-1 actually in terms of density. So they were able to modify some seeders to somewhat suffice, but not perfect by any means. I'd say barely satisfactory. But they were planted. One of our biggest challenges was the seeds got held up in customs, so we were delayed by a month in the planting. But that being said, they took us through, I would say, the point at which the plants were about 3 to 4 feet tall as they started fading away in their efforts. So at that point, we had to jump in, hire a combination of temp workers, had to get a few other people background checked, and really jump in and try to salvage what was being done on the farm. At the same time, we were building the processing facility, which we have in Pottstown, in order to process the cannabinoids. And we had a desire to process the grains and the foods, as a food product last year as well. But our scope was a little too broad. It was great thought going in, but when you really get into it and you look at how much effort's involved in 62 acres for a year one crop, no less, it was really kind of too much scope for us to bite off. So we pulled back. We decided not to do the food processing last year. We stuck with just cannabinoid processing. And then we'd been partnered with a medical marijuana grower, not processor, in Colorado, who had a recreational grow, a medical grow, and a medical dispensary. We had been embarking on applying in Pennsylvania for the MMJ permit, and he was the founder of that firm, is our master grower. So as things started to kind of degrade with our farming arm, John Greenlee, who's the grower out in Colorado, he moved here and really took over the farm. He salvaged really the best he could, and we did achieve about 10,000 pounds of wet harvest product from there. Projections were at 40 though, and so we came in substantially less than we had hoped, and even that, a lot of it was due to labor, but some of it was due to the weather. This past season was real rough.
Had a bit of rain this year. Yeah,
quite a bit, and quite a bit of rain at the end of the year. And at the same time, in the middle of the year, we had to get water trucks out in the field because it was just so dry.
Yeah, there was a couple of weeks in June?
In June.
Very dry.
Yeah, and because our seeds were held up in customs, that was right around the time they were planted. So, that's probably the worst time that you don't have water. Right. They're not rooted, they're not getting it from the depths. So, so there were some unfortunate things that occurred outside of anybody's control.
Yeah.
There were some things that occurred that we all probably could have been better at foreseeing, and then there were things that, you really learn as you go along the way.
So looking forward to this year, are you going to grow in the same place with the same people, or have you?
Well, not with the same people. We've changed up the people toward the end of last season. We've upgraded quite a bit of our talent on the agriculture side. We've also we're considering utilizing some of the same fields, but we've also become far more educated in what the cost of an acre should be in terms of a rental, and we were way overpaying for that last year. So.
Can I ask the difference between what you should be paying and what you were paying?
500%.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah.
So it's a pretty sizable portion.
Okay.
And I think there were a few. I guess you could say it was in the fine print maybe, but as we negotiated the cost of the land, we were looking at irrigated land, which obviously has a higher value than non-irrigated land, and that's what we based our pricing on. That's what we based the contracts on, to then find out it was actually non-irrigated land. Then we had also had the understanding that that was going to be farm managed land through people that work there, but there weren't any employees that worked there. So, those are the types of things that if you had more than 9 days to due diligence on, the process, you wouldn't run into.
Yeah, you were under the gun to get it done.
But really under the gun to get it done. And, long and short, it was really a very positive learning experience, no matter how you slice it. I mean, I think if we had to go back and say, well, how would you have done it differently? Saying you only had 9 days, I think the only difference is we would have done less acreage last year, just because, do a little less to learn and not spend quite as much money to learn. That being said, when you are, the ability to scale from 4 acres to 10 to 40 to 100, the smaller levels are fairly easy. You can just add people. But when you get up 40 to 100 acres, you've got to have the right equipment. Right. So I am happy that we at least broke that threshold last year, because it really showed us what we had to do, best worst case scenario, in order to get this stuff harvested. And then drying it also becomes a challenge. When you're harvesting 40 or 100,000 pounds of product, you've got to be able to dry it.
You're harvesting flower.
Flower.
Okay.
Well, we are, although there's not really a lot of open market hemp harvest tools out there right now, because it's such a new industry.
Right.
So what people are doing is modifying existing machinery. So if you're,
and that's what you did?
Yeah. So if you're trying to harvest grain, there you're using Walker combines or a variety of methods that are known for other crops, but you're doing it in a way, again, modified. So harvesting grain doesn't mean you don't want the flour. So if you're harvesting grain, flaxseed or something else, oftentimes there isn't any other part of the plant that you do want. But in our case, we're going through and we're chopping the grain. It's going into the Walker combine, getting sucked through. The flour material is getting shot out the back of the harvester. Yeah. In our case, we wanted that material as opposed to it being waste. So we would have to figure out ways to put buckets on the back, capture that material, and at the same time capture the grain that was coming over the top.
Right.
There are advanced, I can't remember the name of the company, but there's a $1.8 million hemp harvester on the market. It's this giant green monster, I call it, but it looks like it should be a military vehicle. And it'll harvest the stalks and the flower at the same time. So it goes through and it basically chops the flower first, and then there's like a scissors mechanism on the bottom that'll capture the stalks and stems and process them through a lower bin. So you're able to capture them both in the same vehicle at the same time. But obviously, when even 300-400 acres doesn't justify the cost of that piece of equipment. Yeah. So
you didn't buy that this year?
We didn't buy it this year. We're not buying it next year. We had tried to engage a firm, Hemp Logic, who was working with the manufacturer of that company, who had planned on coming down and making a trip from Maine through North Carolina with that product, and then doing hemp harvesting on an outsourced basis. I don't believe it happened. We had tried many times to get a hold of them, and I don't know whether the machine didn't get delivered or whether they...
It sounds like a good business opportunity for somebody.
Great business opportunity for somebody. And I think, that's one thing we learned this year is that just in the hemp business itself, there's a lot of opportunity, but in the ancillary business, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for equipment, for drying solutions, for even bringing old silos back from the day. I mean, you need to be, if you harvest for seeds, you've got to dry those seeds. So, there's food drying solutions that can be leveraged, but then there's standard, 1930s farm solutions that can be leveraged. Right. And they work fine. And then with technology that we have today, they can be drastically improved, and made more efficient.
So what did you do with the stalks? Did you harvest those at all? Did you stockpile them?
We stockpiled a bunch of them. We did donate some of them, and really, frankly, lost a lot. I mean, we burned a bunch of them just for lack of anything else to do with them. Yeah. We had some bonfires. We would have loved to, that's where your first question about did you buy hemp from other areas? Buying hemp fiber from China is still currently more cost effective than growing it here, or at least it was last year. Every year, the hemp industry is trying to get more and more optimal to where that isn't the case. and we'd love to be able to provide that fiber to people that utilize it here. Being our first year last year and being halfway into the year, really being inundated with the medical marijuana side of things, we weren't able to seek out fiber consumers as much as we wanted to. Our goal was to donate all of it because last year we knew we weren't going to be able to process it. But this year, what we'd like to do is partner with other groups. So while we're growing for flower and possibly grain, we know other groups are growing for fiber. So just swap. We'll just harvest the fiber, give it to them, have them harvest grains and give it to us. It'd be a reasonable trade because we don't have the ability to process the fiber, they don't have the ability to process the grain. So it could be a win-win.
Okay.
And I think you'll start to see more consortiums or more, independent groups come to market that help out the hemp farmers in the industry.
Okay. So how many acres are you going to grow this year?
Well, we're looking at two options. We do have some university partners, so most of those are on the cannabinoid research side as opposed to the hemp agriculture side. One or two in particular, though, are looking at potentially taking part in the hemp grow. So if they do, potentially up to between 500 and 1,000 acres.
Wow.
Which would put us at a very different business plan and scale, focal point.
You're going to keep that in Chester County, or are you going elsewhere?
It'll be spread out. Yeah, it'll be spread out, including Chester County, though. Chester, Montgomery, York, a place just south of Pittsburgh. And we have enough partners that we could easily get over 500 acres. That being said, though, to get to that level of scale, you're talking about driving your equipment all over the place or having equipment in distributed locations. It's going to really depend on the interest level of the university and how much involvement they want to have. Otherwise, we'll be just under 100. And even if we're under 100, I think that's going to be distributed as well. Because this year we're going to take much more of a kind of a mass quantity, you can take like the high quantity, low quality approach, and they don't necessarily have to be opposing, but we're going to take the very high quality approach. So I'd rather have 10 acres of pristine cannabis grown exactly the way it needs to be grown for the output that we're trying to achieve than to have 60 acres of which half of it goes to waste.
So that output that you're trying to achieve, can you explain the processing part and then what your company is making from it?
The processing part on the cannabinoid side, and then there were really two, as I mentioned, food product and cannabinoid product. Food product is taking the seeds and pressing the hemp seed oil out of them, actually drying them first, then pressing the hemp seed oil out of them, refining that oil, purifying it, and then taking the seed husks that are left over and grinding them down. And you end up with two outputs. One is the oil, which is very high in omega-3s. It's an excellent nutraceutical supplement. Has equivalent, if not higher, protein and heart benefits as, I can't make claims, studied heart benefits, I guess you could say, circulatory benefits, as fish oil does, without the odor, so you don't have that breath issue. The husks, though, we grind them, you end up with gluten-free flour. So basically, you can fry things in it, you can do a variety of things with it, but it is gluten-free, which is obviously beneficial to a lot of people today. The cannabinoid side's always been our focus, though, given our plant-based medicines approach.
So you're not doing the food stuff?
We didn't last year. This year we do aim to do it.
Okay.
And the process to do it is much simpler and much more cost-effective than to do the cannabinoid side.
Okay.
The cannabinoid side, you're essentially processing the flower material not unlike you would process marijuana for a dispensary, if you're making oil, for example. In our case, there's different methods you can use for extraction. You can use water. There's all sorts of newer ones that have come around the corner. The old traditional ones were either butane-based, which is a hydrocarbon, very explosive, CO2, carbon dioxide, which is put under pressure and lower temperature for sub and supercritical extraction, where you're basically turning carbon dioxide into a liquid that either liquid alone or a liquid that has gas tendencies as well. That's supercritical. And then the third method is ethanol extraction. Each one has trade-offs. Supercritical tends to be the cleanest because you're not really using a solvent. CO2 can be considered a solvent, but as soon as it converts back to room temperature, it's a gas and just evaporates.
So what are you left with? What's the
So you're left with, depending upon the method, either a crude oil or a fairly refined oil that can go to market. If you're using, I'll just take ethanol for example. CO2 we opted not to use last year because of where we had to get our seeds from, the potency level in those seeds was far too low to make it worthwhile. We were looking at 3 to 5% CBD, whereas in Colorado you can get 19% CBD, same, from the same similar fields, just different strains. At that level, and the reason it wasn't worth it is CO2's throughput is relatively low, and the cost of the equipment is very high. Ethanol, now hydrocarbon is actually the cheapest extraction method, the most explosive. It's also the most dangerous. So we didn't go that route. And you also can have residual solvents. So you don't want to have residual butane or propane in your product, especially if you're eating it. So we went the ethanol route. And ethanol is commonly used to clean up raw crude oil anyway. So if in a standard process you might use CO2, go through the whole extraction process, you end up with extracted cannabinoids, extracted terpenes, plant lipids, waxes, sugars, a whole bunch of things that you want as well as what you don't want.
It breaks down the parts into
breaks
separate.
Down the parts,
Okay.
right? Well, it doesn't separate them. It breaks them down into one extracted crude oil.
Okay.
Then what you do is you use ethanol to help separate them. So ethanol would help, it's called winterization, but it takes the waxes and the lipids and sometimes the chlorophyll, not so much the chlorophyll, but the waxes and lipids, separates it out from the plant material that you've extracted. So now you only have oil. From there, you can run a process to get rid of the chlorophyll, which turns it from green to a golden brown. And then you can run another process called distillation, which is just like standard distillation that you would do in an oil refinery or anything else, to further purify what you're going after. Distillation can be fractional, so that's where you can say, not only do I not want the sugars, but I don't want THC, or I don't want CBD, or I only want CBN. You can actually take the exact compound you're looking for. And that's sort of the overall process. Now, when you're doing it with ethanol, you've got two choices. You can either do crude ethanol extraction, or what results in crude ethanol, or what results in clean. Ethanol, the old-fashioned way of doing it was it's called a reflux method. And you basically would take your flour material, ground down, dump ethanol, cover it with ethanol, shake it up or agitate it for a period of 4 to 6 weeks, let it sit in there, and it would extract just about every element of the plant. What you're left with is a very dark slurry, they call it. And at that point, it's not good for a lot of things, but in our case, it's very good for our topical creams because we want all of that plant extract. We want the waxes, the lipids, the sugars. All of those things are beneficial to the skin. But if you're using it to make vape oil or something that you're going to consume, vaporize, or something you're going to eat, you don't want those extra components. You just really want the cannabinoids.
Okay.
So then you go through that purification process that I was talking about. Filtration, winterization, there's like a lenticular filtration first, then a winterization, then distillation at the end. Alternatively, if you don't want to go through all those steps, what you can do is chill the ethanol, actually freeze it to negative 86 or negative 50 to 86, and do what's called a QWET, a quick wash ethanol extraction. So you're literally taking this frozen ethanol, you take your flour material and you freeze that also, and you combine the two together, agitate it for about 15 minutes, and then filter the ethanol off. And at that point in time, it's only touched the product for 15 minutes, but you've gotten the bulk, if not all the cannabinoids out of the product, a lot of the terpenes out if you haven't gotten them out first. And some of those terpenes are lost when you boil the ethanol off. But you're not getting the waxes, the lipids, the sugars, because they don't come that quickly. So it's almost like, do you just go after what you want, or do you take everything and filter out what you don't want at the end? Those are your two processes. Okay. They both have trade-offs. It's hard to scale the QWET process currently because they don't make C1D2 or C1D1 freezers for that are that large, and you don't really want to be chilling ethanol in a standard freezer simply because the defrost cycle causes sparks, and you just don't want that around your ethanol. So as the market evolves, you're going to start seeing better freezers or freezers designed for that purpose. Okay. Even this year alone, last year when we shopped for extraction equipment, it was very hard to find something that was hemp scale. In the marijuana industry, it's been around for a long time. people tend to harvest on a regular basis, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, but
because they've got control over it rather than
correct.
The growing season outside.
That's right.
Okay.
So and it's continual perpetual harvest, and so you're doing 500 pounds a week or a couple thousand pounds a week. They're manageable numbers that you don't have to store much before you process it.
But it's not 62 acres
Exactly.
already at one time.
All in a month period,
Yeah.
right? So at that point, you've got a very different problem on your hands. So we were trying to find large-scale equipment, weren't successful in the cost-benefit of finding that equipment. So we ended up developing our own storage solution, nitrogen-based storage solution. So we were able to store the hemp for a period of time while we're extracting it on a slower basis.
Okay.
But this year we are seeing a lot more products come to market that are catered specifically to the hemp industry.
Cool. And then, so tell me about the products that you're making with the extractions.
Well, so we're making three primarily. I mean, when I say that, it's because of last year our hemp potency wasn't high enough to justify the others we had on board. So the two we didn't make were a pill form of CBD and the vape cartridges that were CBD only vape cartridges. What we did make or do make are a tincture product line for pain, a whole set of SKUs of topical creams. Some are targeted at pain, some are targeted at healing, one's targeted at immune system, not the topical, antiviral and antifungal support. And then the fifth is actually targeted at pain, but at a specific industry, at the tattoo industry, actually.
Oh, okay.
And what we're finding is, lidocaine-based creams that are used for tattoos last a very short period of time. But adding CBD to them makes them last a much, much longer period of time. And so we went the other way. We took our Soothe formulation, which is our standard pain formulation, we added lidocaine to it and developed a tattoo cream that really works very, very well. So that was our primary line going in. Then toward the middle of the year, we started, based on request, started making pet treats out of CBD. Now, that's the one that created some challenges for us, because we thought, we did some research and we had assumed that getting a cannabinoid-based nutraceutical for pets would be easier to get approved than one for people, but that just isn't the case. So we also thought that because the Department of Health in Pennsylvania, the Department of Agriculture in Pennsylvania, is the same group that oversees the hemp program, that also oversees pet food and pet supplements. And not really supplements, I guess that's the interesting thing. In humans, we've got food, we've got nutraceuticals, and then we've got drugs, FDA-approved drugs. In the pet world, there really aren't nutraceuticals. It's not as gray of an area. So it's really food and drugs. Yeah. So you either need to get your products approved at the state level by the Department of Agriculture, or they've got to be approved by the FDA. And we didn't have that. And as we went down the path, we're thinking, well, it's the same organization. We just went and applied right with the Department of Agriculture, said, hey, we're making this, we want to get a license to be able to sell it. I said, well, you can't do it. You just can't do it. There's all sorts of gray laws or lack of enforcement, I guess you could say, where there's, you can go to almost any store around here now and buy CBD dog treats. And it's not that they're illegal, it's that they don't have the staff to police it.
Okay.
But because we signed a contract and we're part of the hemp program, we're not allowed to use that hemp to create those treats. So, or at least not in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So we do have a division in another state. We've made the formulations. We've actually pre-provisionally patented those pet treats about 3 weeks ago. And because they proved to be the most, and I can just tell from my dog, which I am allowed to test on per the regs, they are the most highly effective product that we've ever seen and made.
So like for hips and pain and that kind of thing, and you notice a difference?
Completely,
right away,
yep. Hips, pain, really, it can be pain, it can be joint-related pain, muscle pain, it can be inflammatory pain, and also anxiety. So a lot of dogs have separation anxiety. The reason we were initially called to make these was on the 4th of July, a lot of dogs have issues with fireworks. Yep. And we did, and the hardest part for us was none of us knew how to bake. So you're making these treats naturally, it only contains 7 ingredients, they're all natural. And but we've had about 40 cases of pets using these treats, and not one has come back saying it didn't work. Right. I mean, every one has come back with extremely positive results. So we are looking at laws in different states and to see how we can get these to market. The one thing I do know is we can't utilize our own hemp or our own hemp extracts for the purpose of these treats. Or, and possibly there's legal ways or ways around it, but I think we prefer to work with the Department of Ag and not
against them,
not make waves.
Right.
So, but we do know if we're in New Jersey, we can order CBD from Colorado. We can make these treats and we can sell them because there's other companies that are doing it today. So that may.
Could you sell them in Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, believe it or not. Yep. Technically, you can go down the street, you can buy CBD gummies for people, and some people will tell you that's legal. Some people tell you it's not legal. So, I'm not a lawyer, but I can just tell you that they're there.
Right. Can you explain the terpenes? How does that differ from a cannabinoid? What part of the plant is that?
So cannabinoids tend to be compounds that are found only in cannabis. There may be a rare exception to a few of them. Terpenes, though, are the smells and the odors and the flavors, even flavonoids, that are found in all plants. So to give you an example, pinene is a terpene. It's commonly found in blue dream marijuana. It's also found in the bark of pine trees. Limonene, same thing. It's found in certain citrus-flavored cannabis. It's found in the peels of lemons. So essentially anything, Valencine is found in Valencia oranges, but also in certain strains. So they are just simply the oils and the compounds that produce those flavors. They also have medical effect, though. Okay. So pinene is a bronchodilator in addition to being an anti-inflammatory. So when you take a cannabinoid like CBD, for example, and it's mixed with pinene, it's going to accentuate the effect of whatever the CBD does or whatever the terpene does. So there's been a lot of studies lately on the cannabinoid receptors and how they react, and many of them are reactant to certain terpenes. And there's more and more studies on exactly what terpenes do to what receptors. And frankly, there's more and more studies on new receptors every day, because everyone talks about CB1 and CB2 receptors, but there's at least 9 receptors that are known within the body. In the body.
Is that the endocannabinoidal system?
Exactly. Yep,
okay. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, other than it's related to the nervous system, and that certain cannabinoids upregulate, certain cannabinoids downregulate, certain cannabinoids don't seem to have a direct effect other than making others have a higher efficacy with respect to that system. I'm not a doctor. I mean, I certainly understand the science behind why some of these things work and why they don't work. Right. We do have a pretty solid medical staff. We have, of my founders, I would say 6 of them are doctors, 5 are pharmacologists, we've got a number of pharmacists. So they could probably tell you much better than I. But what I can tell you is, the CB1 receptors tend to be in the brain. The CB2 receptors tend to be in your immune system, not in the brain, but in the nervous system. The CB2 receptors are really all over the body: digestive system, nervous system, immune system, such that you've heard people say, "Oh, cannabis is good for upset stomach," and it's because the receptors are in your stomach. Same thing with migraine pain and THC. Because your CB1 receptors are in your brain, in your nervous system. But then there's I forget what it is, CS789 receptor, and please don't quote me on that, but there's a receptor specifically in your pancreas that's good for diet. Addressing it impacts the way you process sugars. So for diabetic patients, for example. So what those are the far lesser known receptors, but they're there, and there have been studies, especially in Israel, that have been done on them. But the long and short of it is, there are currently known to be at least 500 compounds in cannabis sativa. Those 500 compounds, when I did some research, I guess earlier this year, there were 133 or 136 documented cannabinoids. And then just last month, there was an article that they found 36 more. So, they clearly don't know them all yet, they absolutely don't know how they interact with each other.
Right.
And
Well,
that's
it seems
what
like
it's
the
all about.
combinations are infinite.
They were, I mean, 500 to the 500th power. So,
Right.
I mean, you could just imagine
Yeah.
the amount of permutations and math statistics and trial and error that it would take to really figure that out. So you hear the term entourage effect all the time. There's really something to it. I think what's really critical is to figure out what are those compounds and components that matter the most. And that's what it's ultimately going to take before I think anybody can synthesize a drug that replaces the natural aspect of, which is again why we believe in plant-based medicines. And that hits it on the head. Is because until you can start decomposing that, really know, I mean, you know, we know CBD relieves pain and it's an analgesic. CBG is definitely an analgesic, stronger than CBD. CBN causes sleep. THC reduces pain. But how, you know, you can go buy cannabis in a store that has the exact same product label as another one. Same CBD level, same THC level, same CBN level. Similar terpenes of the top 10. They do totally different things though. So that in and of itself will tell you, well, those 15 or 20 things that are potentially on a label, that's not it, right? It's something else in there that's causing that. So I just think we have far, far more research to be done to really figure out the true answer to the endocannabinoid system.
So how do you see cannabis fitting into the future? Is it a disruptive force or sort of an ancillary component to medicine and industry?
Well, I think inevitably it's a disruptive force because Big Pharma is so big and they have a lot of lobbyists. I also think it's disruptive. It would have been disruptive potentially in the beverage industry if not for the fact that they're adopting it and embracing it and moving forward with it. So, you know, anything that's going to cause that much change is by definition disruptive, right? Technology was disruptive, but it doesn't mean it's bad. I think it's going to drastically benefit patients and potentially decrease the cost of care amongst patients and increase the quality of life. Now, it's hard to see how the macroeconomy is going to look at it when you look at Big Pharma having as much money as they have and having the lobby power that they have. At some point, they're going to have no choice but to get involved. And I think when that happens, hopefully you'll see synergies and you won't see them trying to patent parts of, you know, compounds from the plant just to never let them be used.
Right.
You know, and you know, it happens. Yeah. It absolutely happens. Too much, I think, and I worked for Big Pharma for a number of organizations for about 12 years, including winning a large project with the FDA. And I've just seen drugs shelved, not because they didn't work, but because the pharmaceutical company couldn't make enough money off of it. And but again, this is part of the reason why, you know, I did make the shift out of what I was doing into this field.
Okay. Okay, so our readership at Lancaster Farming can be somewhat conservative. And so like there's, you know, afraid of some sort of marijuana stigma. Is that important?
Well, I think first off that hemp is not marijuana. You know, hemp got caught up in the Controlled Substance Act back, you know, in the early days for a variety of political reasons, I think, and all sorts of, you know, you've heard everything probably from textile industry was against it, the cotton industry was against it, it's fear. But with hemp, unlike marijuana, you can use every part of the plant. You know, the stems can be used for textiles, fiber. You could use it for building materials to build a house with if you want to. And not even if you want to. I mean, you look at hardy board, which is concrete board out there. Hempcrete has such a potential benefit above hardy board, for example. Just in the fact that it weighs a quarter the amount, it's a lot more durable, doesn't lose coloration. There's just, you can go down the line.
Antimicrobial.
Yeah, antimicrobial. So to think of hemp as a drug or as marijuana is just a big mistake. Now there are cannabinoids in hemp, and cannabinoids can be certainly classified as drugs, but you're not talking about psychoactive drugs. You know, having CBN, which is cannabinol, in hemp, yeah, it's also in marijuana. Small percentages can be in hemp, and if you were to make tea out of that hemp, you would get sleepy. But then again, you can go buy Sleepy Time tea in Giant, so you know it's not a problem. Same thing with CBD. It's an anti-inflammatory. Well, there's many natural anti-inflammatories. Aloe is a painkiller for burns. So to classify a plant, it's almost like if you look at the Schedule 1 or the Controlled Substance Act now, it says marijuana is a drug, right? Well, marijuana is a plant also. It's really not a drug. THC is a drug. CBD is a drug. Those components of marijuana are a drug. But to call marijuana a drug is just such an over generalization. It's like saying the penicillium mold is a drug. It's not. It's a mold, right? Until you extract from it, purify it, and then you have penicillin. Well, that's obviously a drug. So I think finally you're starting to see society, and moreover the FDA, having to differentiate because of the recent passing of Epidiolex from GW Pharma in Great Britain. Well, now they've gotten FDA approval for CBD, so no longer is it a Schedule 1, it's a Schedule 5, and that's because it has medical benefit. So for years and years they've been saying, no, it doesn't have medical benefit, part of the fear factor and so forth. And yeah, I get the conservatism, and you look at illegal drug use as being something that's counter to society, and everybody can have their own opinions on that. But when you do have a drug that's available to people that can help them and be far less costly and have no side effects or very minimal compared to pharmaceutical drugs, I think it's about time that people just took an objective look at it, and I think it's really critical to do that.
So I hear stories about the cannabis industry out west having trouble with banking and finance and taxes. Does that affect your business?
It does. We have been fortunate enough to secure a bank here a couple years ago. They've been very good working with us. When we ventured down the hemp path, they were certainly less concerned. They're a very conservative bank. As a matter of fact, they're a federal bank, not just a state bank, which is very unusual. On the hemp side, they were less concerned about what we were doing. They even offered us credit, which is very, very unusual. Most banking is just, you're lucky to be able to write checks. We're looking to purchase the facility in Pottstown, not the one we ended up in, but a different one, and they were going to underwrite that and actually write a mortgage on it, which again is very unusual. We didn't do it just because of the paperwork involved, and not because of the topic, but because we had so many investors that to have all of them provide all their financials just wasn't worth it. But it is definitely a concern. Now the tax issue, we really believe as a company that that's not going to be around for very long. I mean, when you start to see what's going on with Epidiolex, as soon as they make a schedule change, that's just going to put things in motion to where, well, once it's not a Schedule 1, then you're not trafficking.
That resistance almost all falls away.
It really does. Yeah. It starts getting unpeeled almost immediately. So I don't fear the tax issues all that much, but the banking is a headache, for sure.
How much has this 2018 Farm Bill sort of played in your planning for next year?
It has, in the sense that we're not so focused at the state level anymore. So we're looking at partnerships in Vermont, North Carolina. But with it being delayed so long, it's not like the runway has been set forth for you. And given now, last month in New York, this month here in PA, and over the next month or two in certain other states, that's when you have to pretty much ramp up, get your permits. So I think it'll probably affect more people next year. Okay. We'd already I think we're really just in year 2 of our business plan, and we haven't changed it all that much.
What should or could farmers be doing now to prepare for this seemingly inevitable industry?
I'd say educate themselves on the different purposes for hemp. I mean, I think there's a couple of things. If you're a farmer and you're just farming, right, which is fine, you can stop there. You can also make the choice to say, well, I'm a farmer, but I also want to pre-process the hemp and get a little bit further up the value chain, which can make that farmer a lot more revenue over time. But even if you just stopped at farming, the farmer would want to ask themselves, well, what kind of crop am I creating here? Am I growing hemp for the stalk purposes? Am I growing it for the seeds, or am I growing it for the flower, or all of the above? And it's not common you're going to be able to grow for flower and stalks and seeds, because if you're growing for flower, you usually don't want the seeds, like in the flower.
Right.
Yeah, so you got to kind of make that choice. But you can very easily, and to that point, if you're growing for flower, you don't want your field next door to be growing for seeds because the pollen's going to come over, germinate it. So you kind of want to make that choice. But then after that, it's almost like set where you may potentially want to sell, and grow a test crop. And even if you don't sell the first year, it doesn't really matter. But the first and best thing you can do is just grow it, because one thing it does do is, and another thing hemp's been known for is to clean up fields, like in terms of pollutants and so forth. So if you've got a field that may or may not be great for farming, try growing an acre of hemp and see what happens. But hemp isn't hemp, right? Just like any other plant, there's a million species, or subspecies really. Some are known to have very, very strong fibers, and the ones that you harvest for fiber tend to grow very tall. The stems are very thick, and you can't harvest them with standard harvest equipment. Like you need a I forget what it's called, but it's like a sickle bar to come through. Versus the ones that you harvest typically for the flower purposes for cannabinoids, they grow much more like marijuana in the sense that their stems are thin, the plants are shorter. Okay. So you kind of want to make that decision up front, or if I'm a farmer and I'm just trying to get into it, I'd say, okay, this acre's for this acre's for this, and this acre's so I'd try one of each, and just do it, and learn from that doing it. You're going to have a very different type of pest that deals with hemp, or than other crops. Sometimes there's a hemp borer, for example, that's actually usually comes in with the seeds, and then it bores up into the plant and causes problems. Okay. So those are things you don't have. I mean, there's corn borers too. But you don't have them so much in tomato plants. So you want to get used to what are the pest management approaches, what are the herbicide approaches that you'd want to take. And if you want to grow organically, that's a whole different ball of wax. But again, you want to try it. Right. Because the one thing that I think the farmers need is the industry to be there to utilize whatever it is they're growing. And that is going to develop. I mean, I think we imported last year $600 million or more dollars worth of hemp from China and overseas. As more and more industry gets catalyzed that uses hemp, that number's just going to go through the roof. And that didn't include
not the importing.
No, not the importing, but the industry.
Yeah,
right. So as an industry, we use $600 million. Now the idea is to offset that importing with everything we're doing in the U.S. But that $600 million could turn into $1.2 billion to $2.2 billion very, very, very easily. And that I don't think the $600 million even included the cannabinoids. I think that was purely fiber and grain.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there's really an awful lot that can be done there. And, you could make, if you just think about paper, you can make paper from hemp. And I forget what they were saying, but it was like an acre of hemp in comparison to like 20 acres of trees, or something to that effect. But even if it were 20 acres of hemp, that would make the same paper of 20 acres of trees. How long does it take to grow a tree?
Yeah, right.
You're looking at 3 months to grow hemp. So it's such a renewable resource. You can use it for biodiesel, for fuels. There's been studies that show hemp fiber can conduct electricity and actually store electricity. So these are things we didn't know in 1937 when people were still growing hemp. So it can just catalyze so much in the way of industry. And I think as soon as you start to see some bigger companies making some substantial investments, it's going to be in demand. And you're going to see the prices per acre go back up again. They're still high. I mean, you can still, on the raw open market, get 2 to 3 times the sale value for an acre product of hemp than you can for soybeans. So, it really is a good driver to get farmers to try it.
How can farmers avoid getting the short end of the stick?
With respect to
all sorts of things. Historically, farmers sometimes get taken advantage of, or overlooked, or cut out of certain supply chains. Do you think is there anything they could do to sort of protect themselves as this industry grows?
It's a really good question. I mean, I'm not a farmer by trade, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that in terms of what have they done in the past for other industries. But I would look at the same thing. I assume there's groups, I don't want to say lobby groups, but
unions,
farmers unions and things that can really kind of defend them. The other thing is as these become more commoditized products, there should be a market trade value for these things. So if you bring the harvest to market, it's worth X, and that's pretty much how it's starting to work in Europe. So I would see that evolving, but yeah, I mean, I guess you can't. We're a capitalist market, so you can't just leave it open and hope for the best. But yeah, not being a farmer, I don't think I'm probably the best person to ask that.
Okay.
One thing I will tell you though is I don't think, whether it's cannabinoids or whether it's, I can certainly not see AstraZeneca and Merck growing their own hemp to get cannabinoids. So I think in some senses, just core competency is it's gonna help.
Let the farmers
farm,
yeah.
and let the processors process, and let the manufacturers manufacture. But yeah, I think there's got to be some governance in that. I think some of it's incumbent upon the Department of Agriculture at the state level too, because they really have to protect it.
If you can look into the future, is the hemp crop more about fiber or more about medicinal uses, or just a wide spectrum?
I think it's a wide spectrum. I really do. I think there's so much that can be done from the fiber. And there is, to some extent, just not enough, in my opinion. It's just right now, our methods of harvesting it and decorticating and processing it aren't cheap enough to make it really where it's worth it here. Right. But I really believe in all three.
Jon Cohn, thank you very much for talking to me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us today on the podcast. I am your host, Eric Herlock, and I hope you have been enjoying these conversations with various people in the industrial hemp world. I would love to hear from you. Send an email to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. And if you're not familiar with lancasterfarming.com, I strongly recommend you check us out. We are one of the leading agricultural newspapers in the country, and we have a lot to offer you. So until next time.